I'm Dave Lane, and I'm here to talk a little bit about an effort by a small group of dedicated people to democratize higher education. It's a modest goal, but we are actually surprisingly making progress, good progress, I think. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. I think it's important just to understand that I'm an engineer and a physicist by training, and I have a great love of just making stuff. I've always been the kind of person, like I suspect many of you are, who just like to work out how things work throughout my life. But I also really like people, and I really like sharing stuff. And so, as you might imagine, I eventually, actually in my university days, stumbled across free and open source software, even before it was called open source software. And I was immediately hooked. I've been involved in it, basically have made it my career and my life to a large extent. And yeah, I'm currently the president of the New Zealand Open Source Society, so I guess that gives you an idea of the level of commitment I have. And I'm keen also on forms of content creation and licensing them in a way that allows others to benefit from them and to make use of them through Creative Commons and things like that. So. A few years back, I sold a tech company which I'd been running for quite a few years that built open source, entirely free and open source solutions. And I was lucky enough to find, having got to the point in my career where I was mostly not actually writing code anymore, I was mostly managing other people writing code and dealing with difficult customers and doing high-level consulting for people that I didn't really have a strong interest in helping. But they had enough money to pay me. I decided to look for something else that allowed me to get my hands back on the tools. And to my amazement, I have pretty much found that. I wanted to take advantage of my very great fortune in life, having received a very good education. I won't say that it's entirely hard work. There was a fair bit of luck and a fair bit of privilege involved in that. But what I did realize was, having achieved that, how could I best make the world a better place as a result? And it occurred to me that the one thing in life that I've been able to work out is unambiguously good, is helping others, or minimizing the barriers that others face to achieving their educational potential. And so on the basis of finding something like that, finding something that allowed me to work in that general direction full time was pretty much a dream come true for me. So, through my convoluted path, I have found myself in the situation where I have the role of open source technologist. That's my official role title, with the Open Education Resource Foundation, which is, some of you are, well, you'll be familiar with the city of Dunedin, which is actually, I think, where one of the early LCAs took place, and it was the first one to ever take place in New Zealand. This foundation is actually headquartered at the Otago Polytech, which is based in Dunedin. And it's a charitable organization, and it is what I would refer to as a lean organization. There are only 2 of us full-time employed. So the founder, who's a fellow called Wayne McIntosh, who is quite amazing at wrangling academics. He also is, almost inexplicably, because he always swears up and down he's not a software developer or a technical person at all, he's absolutely committed to free and open source software. He happens also to have the useful title of UNESCO Chair in OERs. Have people heard of the concept of OER before? Is that a familiar term? So it stands for Open Educational Resources, which basically means things that are, as I describe here under our 3 aims, they are things that have been licensed as free cultural works, which means that they are available for other people to use under terms similar to the CC BY or the CC BY share-alike licenses. Are you all familiar with Creative Commons licensing? Okay. So the idea is that Wayne, coming on to 10 years ago now, decided to start an initiative to create an entirely new form of higher education. He's actually South African by birth, and you may or may not be aware that in South Africa, only 20% of people of university or traditional university age can actually find a seat in a higher learning institution because there's just not enough of them there. And in fact, across Africa as a whole, it drops to 2%. So if you think about the educational potential that is not being realized in Africa alone, it's staggering. I think Wayne has said in the past that you'd have to build a new 10,000 person university every week for the next 50 years to be able to meet the demand that currently exists. So it's quite a substantial ask, and it's not likely to happen in meat space. So the organization that Wayne created, this foundation, has these three aims. One is to create an entire university's worth of material, but all openly licensed, so entirely free cultural works. In order to achieve that, I'll explain to you before, in a minute, how we've achieved these things. But the other thing was he wanted to create a partnership of like-minded tertiary institutions, so universities and polytechs and similar institutions around the world, who supported the idea of expanding the availability of education. Some of them might do it for the fact that they are, almost every university, or I think every university generally has a mission, a component of their mission, which is for the greater good. But in other cases, a lot of universities, and especially polytechs and around the world, but I think especially in places like New Zealand, are currently struggling with how they're going to maintain viability in the years to come, because they simply, their student numbers to a certain extent are dropping despite the fact that there should be increased demand. The models for teaching and the disconnect between what the market requires and what the institutions are teaching people is increasing all the time. And so we get a real disconnect that threatens the very viability of certainly the polytechs in New Zealand. They're actually looking at all amalgamating. I don't know if you're all aware of this, but they're looking at amalgamating all of the polytechnic institutions into a single organization with a single admin pool just to cut costs, and you can all imagine what kind of a disaster that's going to be. But in some cases, these universities partners might be motivated by exploring new business models, which involve, for example, offering assessment-only services rather than more bums on seats in classrooms. So there's any number of reasons why institutions might be partners in this initiative, but he wanted to make that he thought that by engaging with institutions that already exist and giving them an opportunity to hedge their bets against a major disruption, that would strengthen our overall mission. And lastly, he wanted to create a platform for delivering all of these openly developed course materials and curriculum materials. Crucially, he wanted it to be possible for someone who was studying those learning materials to be able to do so in such a way that if they met assessment criteria as determined by one or more of the partner institutions, they would actually gain academic credit from that institution that they could apply to a degree. So this isn't like a Coursera or a Khan Academy concept where you get a certificate that says you've completed a Coursera course. This is actual accredited institutional credit that you can transfer to any institution that allows articulation of credits from other places, which most institutions do nowadays. So that's, to be honest, that's the really hard part of this whole equation, is convincing academic boards in all these different jurisdictions all around the world to agree on some common lingua franca of sorts to allow credit transfers, especially given that what comprises a course actually differs across different parts of the world. So it's been a real challenge, and one that has been Wayne's life work, my colleagues. So one of the things that Wayne, in his great wisdom, decided on at the very start was that the Open Education Resource Foundation was going to be a radically open organization, and the so-called Open Education, the OERU, or Open Education Resource Universitas, which is the partnership with our foundation and all of the tertiary institution partners. So that's the OERU, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. We are a radically open organization, which means that all of our strategic direction is out in the open for everyone to see. It's all composed and discussed around Wiki with various online tools. And we also have a annual partner meeting, which I've got a link here. The last one was in Port Macquarie in New South Wales just in November last year. So people from all of our, or many of our partner institutions took part in that. And all of the strategy is an evergreen document, which is updated all the time, but everyone can see who's done what updates and when. And so everyone who contributes to it, their contributions are acknowledged and valued, and it's done in such a way that everything is completely open. All of our meetings, when we get together for physical meetings, are streamed. In fact, a lot of our virtual meetings are streamed as well. So anyone can watch them. They're streamed openly without requiring any authentication to be able to view them. And if they're streamed, they're also recorded and made available for posterity. So anybody can see what led to decisions that we've made or strategic changes in strategic direction, and things like that. And wherever possible, our organization and all of the work that we do for the broader network is done using free and open source software. So we actually only use Linux internally. And we make sure that we're a good citizen in the FOSS world by contributing back upstream. And all of our own internal projects are also openly licensed and available for people to collaborate on. We have a few other interesting policy positions that you might find interesting. We have the policy that all of our curriculum materials in the form of courses and in the form of the raw educational materials should be available for anyone to view and incorporate into any form that they want. So any educator can take our curriculum materials and build them into any course that they want to teach, regardless of where they are. They don't have to be a partner or anything. It's just all available on the open internet. The idea is that I'll show you. We use a website called Wiki Educator, which is a MediaWiki instance. It's actually one of the top 100,000 sites on the web, or usually hovers right around 100,000. And it has a fairly huge compendium of curriculum materials that people have added over the last 10 years. And over time, as I said, we're building an entire university's worth of course materials. We also want to make sure that rather than adopting an LMS for making our course materials available to learners, we've actually eschewed that entirely because we see that generally as a monolithic solution that tends to only, it's not best of breed of anything. Usually it's sort of a compromised situation. The main reason for an LMS is essentially to be able to control access to it. And it's interesting that many people that go to a university or a polytech that have access to an LMS lose access to that LMS when they finish. So they suddenly, all of the work that they've done, all of the artifacts of their participation and so on are locked away from them. And also, if you're not enrolled as a student, you generally don't have access to the LMS at all. In our case, we wanted to make sure that the only time that a learner has to authenticate in our system is if they want to actually contribute to discussion, so that we can avoid the issue of anonymous posts and abusive behavior and so on, so that we can ensure a modicum of good behavior, and also to enforce our code of conduct, and also to ensure that credit is given where it's due to people's contributions. So that's really the only reason that we have any authentication. We don't want to have any learners or even educators collaborating on our materials be forced to sacrifice any of their freedom to participate, nor should they be disadvantaged if they don't have a particular piece of proprietary software. So effectively, we say anybody who comes along has the ability to participate, and we'll provide you with all the tools, and they'll all be open source. And you can choose to use your own tools if you so desire. And we also ensure that none of the services that we offer require people, or none of the services that our course materials depend on require people to sign up for something that potentially compromises their freedom or their privacy. So yeah, we don't mandate the use of any third-party tools at all. And of course, we have to make sure that this whole thing is financially and fiscally sustainable. And amazingly, we've actually pretty much achieved that. So I'll explain to you a little bit more detail of how we've fulfilled those different goals. So I've mentioned to you already about WikiEducator. I'll show you some of these things. I mean, if anybody is particularly good at doing updates of massive media wiki implementations, let us know, because this is in dire need of an upgrade. But that's one of my jobs for the coming year. But this just gives you an absolute tip of the iceberg view of what's going on here. But we've got we've got huge amounts of content on here. In terms of our actual mechanisms for delivering course materials, and also our mechanisms for allowing learners to communicate with each other to gain the experience of the camaraderie that you would otherwise get in a physical university setting. We've got a lot of collaboration tools that we make available, also all open source. Similarly, we make a lot of tools available for people who are collaborating on building our educational materials, and we give them mechanisms for communication as well. I'll show you some of those a bit later. But we've adopted the Unix philosophy for tools. So the idea, if you're not familiar with the Unix philosophy, that you have each tool that you have does one job really well. You don't try to have a tool that tries to do everything, which is a common side effect of the proprietary model, where you always try to expand. Once you get your proprietary product into an organization, you try to expand its scope so you can keep on charging the people who have paid for it. In our case, we want to have the tools do their appointed job really well, and instead of trying to build more functionality into one tool, we would rather have a whole bunch of different tools work really well together. So we've adopted a very a loosely coupled component-based architecture for our entire system, our entire IT stack. We have a lot of interest actually at the moment in the higher education world about what, I mean, other people are talking about things like next generation digital learning environments, but ours is a lot more next generation than most of the ones that are being talked about in the education circles. So yeah, we've been finding that there's been quite a substantial amount of interest to the extent that people in education understand what we're even talking about. My previous talk about this has been to our partner representatives at this meeting that we had in Port Macquarie, and most of them were quite amazed by what we can do, and they were even more amazed when they saw what our budget was for doing it. But they didn't really fully understand the kind of the magnitude of having all this stuff being built by communities of people around the world. We also think, in terms of our delivery model, we also think about everything being mobile first, because it turns out that in the developing world, most people actually don't have computers. They mostly have mobile devices. So we already see that in the initial courses that we've run, we've actually had more than half of our participants engaging with mobile devices. And we consider very carefully our scalability of the tools that we incorporate into our environment, because while we're serving thousands of users now, we expect to be serving hundreds of thousands maybe by the end of this year, maybe millions in the next 4 or 5 years. So we're expecting this to grow substantially. And we also have the huge advantage that if anytime a better free and open source software component comes along and we're able to identify it, we can easily pull out whatever was filling that role previously and replace it with a new tool relatively seamlessly. And usually from our end user's perspective, it's a transparent change, just purely an improvement. And our partners also have the ability, if they gain exposure to these tools and use them and actually can see how much value they would be for their institutions, they can adopt these tools at their institutions as well. And in doing so, they'll typically save several decades worth of our annual membership fees just by any one tool that they might adopt. So yeah, it's a pretty compelling thing. So effectively, we're providing a global demo to tertiary institutions as to how you can actually do software better. Yeah, so I'd like to say that I talked earlier about sharing and how I really think sharing is crucial. I mean, I think sharing is absolutely vital to all forms of education. In fact, you can't have education without sharing. I know that I like to say that you know that you're really top of the class when you're in kindergarten, because your kindergarten teacher says, Dave shares well with others, and then you spend the rest of your educational career being taught that it's wrong to share. and it gets progressively worse as you get farther and farther in your education. And I've kind of come full circle, and I reject that. And I have been working really hard to help people recognize how completely detrimental and how that creates cognitive dissonance that I think is unhelpful. But yeah, so our entire infrastructure is built around the ideas that our learners are potentially our educators as well, and so that's again one of the reasons why our entire stack is FOSS, so that people who might be undertaking classes with our tools can actually figure out how it all works as well, and we can even assist them in doing so. So how does this whole thing maintain the sustainability that I mentioned? At the moment, each of our partners contributes a $4,000 membership every year. Some of them choose to pay us more. But basically, with 30-odd institutional members, we get $4,000 from each. We also have a small grant from the Hewlett Foundation, and we've been one of their grantees for probably one of the oldest current grantees. But that is kind of just allowing us to grow more rather than needed for sustainability. So we're actually more or less sustainable now just with our membership fees, and we're gaining more partners all the time. And in fact, we've just launched an initiative in the last couple of weeks whereby institutions in the developing world can join us without having to pay a membership fee. And the only condition of them participating is that they begin to adopt our courses and begin to teach them. And contribute back and do things like localize our materials for their cultural requirements and so on. We just had the first one of those new, what we call outreach partners, joined, and it was the Open University of Nepal. So that was really thrilling to have that, to hear about that just last week. So I've already mentioned a lot of this stuff for you, and so now I thought I would just give you a little bit of a look at the actual technology stack, given that this is a technology conference. I'm imagining some of you are wondering, well, how the heck does it all work? So I've already showed you Wiki Educator. If you want to see what one of our course deliveries looks like, this is a WordPress site running in multi-site mode, and effectively all of our courses are rendered from Wiki Educator into WordPress multi-sites, or they can be put into standalone sites as well. So basically, a course is created on Wiki Educator. So this course here that you're looking at the bottom of every page, so anybody can go to this course site anytime. So it's course.oeru.org/LIDA101, which is the course code. At the bottom of every single page in this course, you'll see a content link. And that content link points you back to the page in Wiki Educator where that course material originates. And you can see the entire history of that page and who created what. Essentially the version control is available for that. A full course is set up as an outline of which just recruits in a hierarchy or a set of pages. So this is the same course that I just showed you in an outline form. And so if someone wants to create a new course on Wiki Educator, they simply create an outline page. They can even copy this one, and they can just change the references to other content within Wiki Educator. And then there's a one-line template at the top of the page, which defines a target WordPress site, which can be any site that's publicly visible on the internet, essentially, for which the person clicking on that request snapshot has authentic admin access. They can click on that, and they'll be asked to enter their login and password for the WordPress site. And open source code, which my predecessor in this role wrote, will actually generate a XML content archive, which will automatically be then installed on the WordPress site. And so you never upgrade or you never update content in WordPress. You just do it in Wiki Educator to maintain the version control and so on. And it only takes about a minute. We have some partners, like I had a conference call with one of our partners, the University of Highlands and Islands in Scotland, where we had our partner meeting 3 years ago in Inverness. We had a video conference with their educational design team, and they were telling us about how they had this quite efficient system where their teachers would their instructors would create curriculum materials in Microsoft Word documents, and then they would have their team of 5 full-time staff work usually a turnaround time of 3 or 4 days for their 5-person team, and they would convert it into an online resource. So we showed them that you could do it in about a minute here with no people. So yeah, they all were looking very nervous by the end of that conversation, in case any of their administrators or managers saw how many people they could cut off the payroll. But anyway, so I should point out that a given course is, so anyone can register for a course, but we also have, we have introductory materials. We have a whole help website for all learners who want to get involved, who want to study our materials. As I said before, you can study all these materials without even logging in. So if you're a nervous learner who's thinking maybe university's for them, but maybe it's not, you can actually sit down and you can do one of our courses from start to finish without any fear of public humiliation or anything. You can dip your toe in the water, or a gifted secondary student, or a returning student, or any number of different types of learner can come in and they can test the waters and convince themselves that they actually think they can do these courses. And then at some point, at any point, they can request an assessment service from one of our partners who offers assessment services. Now, actually, Otago Polytech here in New Zealand, they also have a formal micro-credentialing system called EduBits, and all of our courses are available as micro-courses. So all of the curriculum areas are described here as learning pathways. So all of the learning information, the curriculum material, is all behind these. So this includes videos and multimedia presentations and various other things that illustrate the different concepts. But one of the most interesting things about what we're doing here is we have, for every one of our sites, a thing called a course feed. And this is a tool that my predecessor and I have been working on, which essentially scours the internet, and it pulls in from all manner of places on the internet. It pulls in references to any given course. And it allows, people can, have any of you heard of a tool called Hypothesis? It's a tool that allows you to annotate any web page, and it's an open source tool. It uses a plugin in different browsers, or you can even just use a JavaScript snippet that you don't even have to install a plugin. You can actually write a annotation and provide tagging and so on for any web page or online PDF that you might find. And people can then follow your feed. If you make your annotation public, people can follow your feed with RSS and so on. You can see what tags people have posted annotations with. And what our system does is it actually looks through all of the tags, and it finds anybody who's posted on any one of our courses, and it automatically pulls in a reference to their annotation in the feed. But we have lots of other, we have a blog monitoring service, so any learner can elect to list a blog URL for their personal blog. We've actually written, I've written something called the Blog Feed Finder, which I don't know if this will be of interest to people, but anyway, we can talk about these things later on. The idea is that people are notoriously bad at knowing what their blog feed URL is. So I wrote a thing that allows them to just put the URL of their blog in, and it will find their blog feed URL. And it will then give them the choice of associating that with any course. So they might have a different blog for different courses. So it will monitor their blog from time to see if they've posted anything that's tagged with the course that they're taking, in which case they'll incorporate a reference to it into this feed. Similarly, Twitter, we also maintain a Mastodon instance. For those of you who heard of Mastodon, you can post, if you're logged in, you can actually post directly through the site, the course site itself. If you're logged in, you can make your own post there. And there's any number of other places that you can do this. I'll just show you, this is sort of our technology wheel. We also maintain discourse forums. Any posts in discourse, if they're categorized or tagged with a course ID, any posts or responses there will be incorporated into the appropriate feed. We have a social bookmarking site, which is used in some of our course assessments, where you have to scour the web for references for the topic of the course, and you create a effectively an annotated bibliography of resources for that course, and that's how you fulfill some of the course's requirements. And you can use our social bookmarking tool. We're actually looking at the moment, this is an example of the loosely coupled architecture. Semantic Scuttle is a fairly primitive PHP app. We've actually been looking at something called Wallabag, which has a wallaby as its mascot, although interestingly it's written by an Italian. But it's another very nice open source app which is much more modern in its interfaces and so on, and it actually provides good mobile support as well. We also do things like monitor Medium and Blogger for suitably tagged posts, same with WordPress.org, and as I said, Hypothesis. At the moment, just for completeness, we actually host all of our infrastructure in 4 different places at the moment. So we have hosting in the US with Amazon for the Wiki Educator site, because that's got such high traffic, and that's probably the sweet spot in terms of latency for the majority of users. We host a lot of services in Germany with a company there called Hetzner. We have some infrastructure there with them. We benefit from a charitable organization grant from Microsoft, and we use Azure, although I need to point out that both with Amazon and Azure, and actually any of our services, we treat them all as generic commodity hosting. We don't use any proprietary tools that those services provide. We need to be able to drop them in a second if we decide that their terms or their behavior or whatever doesn't suit us anymore. And here in New Zealand, we've actually got, for example, our Git repositories on sponsored hosting, generously sponsored hosting from Catalyst IT. So we have a GitLab instance that's hosted here in New Zealand. Interestingly, our entire IT budget, not including my salary, is $5,000 a year. And we're servicing currently thousands of users, but we could easily service tens of thousands of users with that infrastructure, and scaling up by twice would probably allow us to support 100,000 users. And my main mission at the moment is to improve our monitoring of our systems. But just to give you an idea of the kinds of technologies that we use, so our own site is a Silver Stripe site, which I'm probably going to replace with something else, but yeah. If you go to oeru.org, you can read all about us. In fact, I'll just show you very quickly while I'm here. You might be interested to see who some of our partners are. This should give you a bit of an idea. So we have partners in 5 continents. In fact, the only there's a concentration of partners from Commonwealth countries, to be fair, although we do have partners in the Middle East and in Europe as well. Yeah, we're very keen to be increasing our interest in South and Central America and in Asia. So that's one of the reasons that we're really chuffed to have the Open University of Nepal join us. So this just gives you an idea of the institutions that are involved at the moment. So it's not, a lot of them are up and coming institutions who see this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves from others, but we've got people like Penn State, for example, in it. So they're one of the tier 1 universities in the world. So anyway, that gives you an idea. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, it's over here. First one, I think.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alexandra Pavlik. I work for Stencila, but I also have been collaborating for many years now with Software and Data Carpentry, if you know these two initiatives. So, so these are 2 initiatives that teach software and data skills to researchers through somewhat similar ideas that you have. So I have lots of questions, but obviously I'll probably take them offline. But one of the questions I have is, so Software and Data Carpentry, the focus is the materials are available and they're also licensed quite freely, but the core are in-person workshops. And that has definitely contributed to massive success of both of these things.
Absolutely.
So I wonder, because there is a lot of research, the body of research doesn't come from software data carpentry, but from evidence-based research in education, that purely online learning has not changed the situation of people that don't have access to education. It's just, you know, people don't finish these courses. These courses literally work for people who already know that material and they need a refresher. So I wonder how you treat that, how you approach that in terms of addressing the problem of, you know, people that don't have access to education or have maybe limited access. Online education doesn't really solve their problem.
I'm glad you asked. I can answer that very quickly. I'll just show you a picture. I brought this up before. Let me see. This is a picture that was sent to us by our first cohort in our Learning in a Digital Age course. This is a room in a civic building, apparently in Kerala, India. And the man in the picture has arranged the hire of this room, and he's arranged to have there be computers in the room. And these are housewives from India, and they are all doing our course together. And his role is he makes a certain amount of money by providing that facility. And our objective is to create the opportunities for people to exercise entrepreneurial creativity and come up with things like this. One of the other initiatives besides our outreach program that I described before is we're also doing a library program. I don't know if you've come across a group called, they're called Peer-to-Peer University, and they're based in the US originally, but they have a program called Learning Circles, where they have built a open source technology stack which facilitates libraries registering free courses that are available online, but they can, any given library can choose to say, this particular course at this link will be taught in our computing facility on this night, and there will be people there to help you get logged in and have be able to sit down and get started on the course. And people then end up being able to work together in a camaraderie type situation, or a collaborative situation. And there's usually someone there, often a librarian, who will provide facilitation and just help them kind of with the nuts and bolts of getting involved. And so we're working very closely with libraries all around the world. In fact, that's our main initiative this year, in addition to the outreach, is to really sow the seed with libraries to make sure that they're making good on their public good missions. And I should say that I'm actually, I went through training as a software carpentry trainer, so I know Jonah as well, who ironically is also based in Dunedin now. Yeah.
Hi Dave, great talk. Thanks for all those good-looking resources. I've also done the software carpentry thing, and one of the things they tell you in the instructor's course is about formative assessment. Mm-hmm. And so there was a good talk in LCA last year using OpenEdX as learning management system. Yep. And some people had used the plugin infrastructure to automatically spin up VMs that learners could practice things on. So in the middle of their course, they could sort of stop reading the instructional material and then do some exercises. Mm-hmm. So is there something equivalent in the Media Wiki site where you could have, say, multi-choice questions or was it called Parsons problems?
There are. In fact, my predecessor in this role, by the way, I'm just noticing my laptop battery is getting low. What's that? Okay, so it doesn't matter. Okay, never mind. Yeah, one of my predecessors is actually one of the original developers of edX. And so that has fed into a lot of the thinking behind this. So we're very, a lot of the tools that we've built include things like assessment and test assessments or mock assessments and so on. They're kind of built into the infrastructure. So people building a course can choose to incorporate that if they desire. We've got a number of different standards that we support for quiz-based information, quiz-based content.
I'll ask the last question, I think. So many universities are quite profit-driven. you know, they talk about fundraising, but they're actually doing student raising, and some have branches. Some Australian universities have essentially offices in China and the US where they do student raising.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how does that then work with the we won't integrate with corporate interests that you're promoting, because you kind of have to integrate with that corporate infrastructure, and inevitably you're going to, even if they sign up to your you know, to your ideals and goals, it's going to clash in their business processes somewhere, I would think. And related to that, are the universities that sign up, to what degree do those, well, essentially recognition of prior learning type points work within their own university? To what level can you take this in terms of getting a degree? As in, can you do all the units required for a degree, or do you need to go to the uni at some point?
Right. Yeah. Well, some of our partners do have an in situ requirement. However, interestingly, a couple of them do not, and they have. So we currently offer our first minimum viable degree, a one-year diploma in general studies or in business studies, and it's currently being awarded by 3 of our partners, including the University of Highlands and Islands, sorry, and 2 one in the US and 1 in Canada as well. Because of that kind of demonstration of flexibility, it's kind of made the other ones look a little bit bad. And a number of them are actually pushing through their academic boards at the moment, removing their in situ requirements. And we're also finding that there is a certain amount of peer pressure about the partners who are actually contributing more than other partners. It's kind of making the ones that aren't contributing as much look a little bit bad, and the ones that kind of look like they're just maybe in it for the business opportunity of offering assessment services, for example, it's making them, it's a subtle thing. There's certainly no outright you know, prejudice or anything, but it does kind of make them look a little bit money grubbing by comparison. So we're hoping that there's a bit of a peer pressure movement going on there. I don't know how much time. I can't remember. No? Okay. Sorry. Yeah, feel free to talk to me afterwards. Thanks very much.